Okay. Well, now we have a lot of time, so anyone can ask questions if they want to.
As you mentioned, Heidegger said Western philosophy is dead after Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Right. What do you know? What does he think about logical positivist and analytical philosophy that was growing at that time in the German-speaking world?
Yeah, Heidegger didn't talk so much about his contemporary philosophers, like philosophers at that time, maybe a part of Sartre, which he criticized in his letter on humanism. But I can suppose that his the logical positivism and all these many ways of how West European philosophy went through many ways. All the history was error just because it was error in the beginning. The whole European philosophy, which started after Plato and before Heidegger, the Heidegger was thinking of himself as kind of a new prophet. Maybe he didn't say that, but in all his works, he said that the whole way of philosophy was mistaken, and it's ended in Nietzsche, in his nihilism. Right? So that was a long way, and then it's evening, right? That's the death of philosophy.
I a little bit personally agree with Heidegger here on this point, because maybe I shouldn't talk about my opinion, but anyway, because I don't agree that analytic philosophy is something like very worth of.
He didn't think that any philosophers of that time and that kind of.
Because that was the period when analytic philosophy started, and now in the 20th century it's only analytic philosophy. And I think Heidegger, I remember like he sometimes said that these analytic philosophers destroyed the art of metaphysics. For him, metaphysics was kind of art, like creative science. But the analytic philosophers, they only think in numbers, in concepts, in.
Actually, the metaphysics should be destroyed. It's the destiny of metaphysics, because metaphysics, like the metaphysics, is in a traditional way, the metaphysics was a kind of a dead road for Heidegger, because it was accomplished in this century in our mind of first Nietzsche. The God is dead, right? There is no God among us. We are Sartre, humanism. Existentialism is a humanism. Very difficult to pronounce. And the third point is nihilism. That's nothing exists. No, we don't. It's like a postmodern world. Nothing is above us. We are a center of this world, and we don't care about any beings, and just we enframe ourselves. We enframe ourselves in this technological, how you call Bestand, right? It's something that they all things like this cup or this cell phone, this kind of equipment, an inventory for us. All the beings for human is an inventory. That was the end of the road of traditional European philosophy. Yeah.
More questions?
Can you just say again the difference between being and beings? Something with concept. You mentioned one definition.
Yeah. Okay. So if we can imagine that something exists, if something is being, we always should connect being to something that is after being. Can you imagine, or let's say the word doing, right? If we can we say imagine the word do? It always do something, do homework, or I don't know, do a speech, right? So it's something it's very difficult with our logical concepts to imagine out of the context. The same with being. So that's why the whole European philosophy tradition deals with beings, not with being actually, with the concept of being that's absolutely different from concept of Sein there, that's the of beings, of things. And to get out of this is very difficult way. And how is the language? The language is one of one way, and just to listen through how the being is speaking to us through the language in poetry or art, works of art, and works of thinking. Yeah, Mike.
So is that right that each existence is contextual because it's involved into the world? You cannot take it out of it.
Yeah.
It's always doing something for some purpose.
Yes,
right?
and then we're going to the Zion side, right? To the time and the being that was a revolution, right, in European. Actually, when I was thinking to do a high speech on Heidegger, I was thinking to do it on Zion side, but then I said that concept of being, that was kind of a basic concept. The difference, the ontological difference, was more crucial. But the many of concepts from Zion side was still used in also in late Heidegger works, right? The being of the world, that we come to the world, we already found ourselves in the big context, in the context of with our background, with our targets, and it's very difficult to take out our concept out of this context. Yeah.
So, can you try to say in a paragraph or two exactly how Plato's idea of being and Heidegger's idea of being differ from each other? How they're not the same?
That was actually this was my main point, because.
But I think that's partly what Michael was asking about, right? Because if they don't exist in Plato's idea of just being out there with no form,
no context,
right? Without context, then where do they exist, right? If it's not Plato's idea, and if they still don't have space, they only have time. I don't know. I think maybe because I've heard the idea from Plato so many times, I kind of understand. I can kind of get that. But can you try to describe?
I answered by saying this some minutes ago, that the concept of Plato, of ideas of Plato, was created by humans themselves. That exists in us. So what we imagine, what can we do with these ideas, with set of concepts of ideas of Plato, is to understand the world, or try to get access to the world, understanding of the world through our concept that's created by ourselves. And of course, it doesn't have anything to do with being.
So Heidegger is saying that's the main problem, because we're looking at it and reflecting using our own ideas.
Yes.
So what Heidegger is actually saying is there's another level of being beyond that, which is we're unable to really reflect upon, but can only see in certain instances. Like you were saying, essence or something like that?
Beginning from Plato, the philosophy went the wrong way to understanding everything through beings, or through itself, through human as a center, or of understanding.
And is that why you're talking about, like, poetry and art can help you see being more clearly?
Yes, because it's kind of enlightenment of being. The being speaks to us through languages. It reveals itself to us. It shows itself to us. So actually, the truth is what is truth is our openness to language, to being, nothing more. Not a creation of a kind of a framework to understand our world or actually the metaphysics. What was metaphysics? It was created a set of a concept was provided by very philosophers, very talented philosophers, genius, but still human being. Michael.
Well, maybe it would be helpful if we bring up this distinction that he talks about. That I don't know if it was him or one of his interpreters that they said that we basically live in this mindless, everyday coping. That's the level of existence we live every day. We don't ask these big questions, and there are only some moments, and the art is one of the medium to get to it, that poetry and so on, or facing death or this kind of situations that we go deeper, and then we can sort of experience Dasein as it is, in some sense, without getting into this involvement in every day. So it's kind of tricky because the characteristic of Dasein includes being involved into the world, all those mundane activities that we have every day. But at the same time, those activities keep us away from getting into Dasein.
Let me say, you said some great things, and what I can explain maybe in my own language that so-called Zeitgeschichte, the history of, is not a history as we know, as of some famous people. Something happened, right? But the history of being revealing to us through in works of art and philosophy, were kind of enlightenment, and actually, he said that only these art acts of language of creation is matter in the history of being. So actually, everything that the whole history of if the thinking does not have a point as difference between Sein and Seide, that's rubbish for Heidegger. Only in philosophy and in poetry and in art we can feel this ontological difference between being and beings, and that is what matters for Heidegger in our world, right? In Zeitgeschichte, not any deeds or what made by human or something like the achievements of human civilization. This Heidegger is not important. Yeah.
This sounds very Eastern. This is very Zen. I mean, very Buddhist in a way. Like this being that you're talking about is very similar to Dharmakaya, to the Buddhist nature, to the original essence. What was your face before your mother was born?
Yeah. Qua.
Yes. This is not unlike. So I think he might have been informed by this.
You know, in what was there are not so many books in Chinese about Heidegger, but what was there's very famous books and essays about how Heidegger is connected to Eastern philosophy, like Heidegger and Chinese philosophy. Like there is a book of Heidegger in Chinese, and then maybe in the end of this high connection, Heidegger and Eastern philosophy. It's very actually in Eastern. I don't know about Japan and Korea, but in Taiwan it's very famous subject too. Because when Heidegger really he was some concepts were really close.
Okay, maybe just a comment on Angel, what Angel said. Yeah, it's known that Heidegger had contact with Eastern philosophy on this language as silence. Sounds very like Zen Buddhism.
Yes.
And he was also trying to translate Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching during the war years. Yeah, he was working with a Chinese some Chinese philosopher, professor.
And
Yeah.
his famous essay was.
It's not accidental. He really was influenced by
Yes.
Eastern thinking.
And one of his most famous essays is about his talk with a Japanese philosopher,
Yes.
because it's very famous.
And those students that I mentioned before,
Yeah.
who were studying under Heidegger in 20s, then later on, in 50s, 60s, they were publishing books and presenting very similar concepts, arguing that actually this is their author work, author ideas that were taken by Heidegger 30 years earlier. So it's a lot of connection with
you're
Eastern
saying that's
philosophy.
kind of a plagiat, right?
I'm not saying. I'm just think when I come to this idea, I was interested if this is really true.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it's physically possible. They were there and they were exchanging
He was inspired.
ideas.
He was inspired.
Heidegger was inspired. He was inspired by Greek philosophy, by Husserl. He was inspired by many.
But if you are inspired,
for sure,
even
yeah.
it's plagiarism.
No, but I think he openly says that recognize the connection to Eastern philosophy. I mean,
Okay, but
he
he didn't
doesn't hide it.
recognize those, particular thinkers.
Okay, maybe.
To go back to things, what we're talking about is a Husserl idea. To go back to things, right? So it's the Heidegger just suggested his way through language, because a word, a saying, right? There's one word can describe one thing. We can access to thing only through language. But the idea was Heidegger, Husserl. The Husserl put Husserl. He put the thing is the center of his philosophy.
Okay, I think if does anyone else have any other questions? Because I have a really silly, stupid one, and and I'm afraid to waste time with it.
Well, I have a question about nothingness. I don't understand how we can talk about being when we can't talk about non-being. We can't talk about things that don't exist.
I will just 1 minute for this question because nothingness to Heidegger is actually being. Why? To be being is not a thing. It's not a being. It's not being on any things that are around us or any events around us. So that's why in this way I'm thinking, not being is nothingness, nichts, right? Because of not being a being. Being is not a being. That's why it's nothing. That's very simple. It's kind of small. Maybe I made more simple than it is, but that's how I understand this.
Silly question.
Okay, my silly question was about, because you were talking about the cups earlier, and how, because when people look at a cup, they think of it in their own context. But what about something that we don't really necessarily have context for, like a pebble by the side of a river or a grain of sand or something like that? That we have no, necessarily, do you know what I mean? Like, let's say a grain of sand. Grain of sand on the beach.
Yes. So is it, you mean how...
Where is its being?
There's a thing that exists, but we can see that being. No, what he's seeing is thing that...
But how, but if we're going... Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
That's very famous Heidegger idea that all being is how we use it, how can it influence our life. So how to use. The question that he mentioned in the Sein und Zeit is not the key question of philosophy is not what is it or how it is, and how it's used, how it can influence my life. So very simple. If we make it more simple, right? So it kind of equipmental thinking. I think. So if you think about this, if you think about the puddle, right, or something, this is how it connected to me.
But that's why I was picking up a pebble or a grain of sand, something
grain of
very
sand.
small that by itself you may not even necessarily see a single grain of sand by itself. You see a handful of sand, or you see a beach full of sand. I don't know.
Probably in the same context as you see the sand.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Any more questions? Otherwise, we can probably wrap it up. We have about 4 more minutes. Anybody want to add anything else? How about you just wrap it up at the very end?
Well, I think that Heidegger, 2 minutes, just end this. Heidegger is the very crucial figure for Western philosophy, and as he thought, he finished the one part of it, and he opened another one. But if you say who continued the Heidegger, what Heidegger is doing, it's really it's unlikely. Like maybe Gadamer with his hermeneutic. But what I can say that Heidegger many of ideas really made us understand a lot the postmodern things even after Heidegger's death. Actually, it's going like in what Heidegger said it should go. So Heidegger, I can agree that Heidegger is kind of a prophet in Western European civilization, and it's the end, or the end is very near.
Okay, I think
With this pessimistic, very, very optimistic ending, like I get.
Okay, thanks, Roman.